ध्यायेत्तस्मासनस्थां विकसितवदनां रत्नवक्त्रायदाक्षीं हेमाभ्रां पीतवस्त्रां करकलितहिमपद्मां वदामि सर्वालङ्कारयुक्तां सततं अभयदां भक्तनम्रां भवानीं श्रीविद्यां शान्तिं सकलसुरनुदां सर्वसम्पत्प्रदात्रीं देव्यायया कृतमिदं जगदात्मशक्त्या निःशेषदेवगणशक्तिसमूहमूर्त्या तामम्बिकाम् अखिलदेवमहर्षिबुद्ध्यां भक्त्यानुतास्मविदधातु शुभानि यस्याः प्रभावमखिलं भगवाननन्दं ब्रह्माहरश्च न हि वक्तिमलं गलं च सा चण्डिका अखिलजगत्परिपालनाय नाशाय चाशुभयस्य महिं करोति या श्रीस्वयं सुहृदिनां भवनेषु अलक्ष्मीपापात्मनां दधियां हृदेषु शुद्धा सदा किलजनप्रभवस्य लज्जा तां त्वामतास्म परिपालयति विष्णु या मुक्तिहेतुरविचिन्त्यमहावदात्तम् अभ्यस्यसे स्वीरेन्द्रियतत्त्वसारैः मोक्षाद्विमुनिभिरस्तसमस्तदोषैः विद्यास्य सा भगवती परमाभिमाय मेधासि देवी विदिदाखिलशास्त्रसारः दुर्गासि दुर्गभवसागरनवरसन्धा श्रीकैडभानि हृदेयकृताधिवासा गौरी त्वमेव शशिमौलिकृतप्रतिष्ठा देवी प्रसीद परमां भवती भवाय सद्यो विनाशयसि भवती कुलानि विज्ञातमेतमग्नैव यदस्तमेत एतं गलं स्वीकुलं महिषासुरस्य ते संहता जनपदेषु धनानि तेषां यशां सुज्ञजसीदति धर्मवर्ग धन्यास्त एव निभृतात्मजभक्तिदारा येषां तदाभ्युदयदा भवती प्रसन्ना दुर्गे स्मृता हरिसिद्धीतिम् अशेषजन्तुः स्वस्थे स्मृता मतिमतीव शुभां ददासि दारिद्र्यदुःखभयहारिणिका कुजन्या सर्वोपकारकरणाय सदा प्रचित्ता नमो देवी महादेवी शिवायै सततं नमः नमः प्रकृतिभद्रायै वीर्यप्रणदास्मदा दुर्गायै दुर्गपारायै सारायै सर्वकारिण्यै ख्यात्यै तथैव कृष्णायै धूम्रायै सततं नमः या देवी सर्वभूतेषु विष्णुमायेति शक्तिदा नमस्तस्यै 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 नमो नमः या देवी सर्वभूतेषु चेतनेत्यभिधीयते नमस्तस्यै 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 नमो नमः या देवी सर्वभूतेषु बुद्धिरूपेण संस्थिता नमस्तस्यै 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 नमो नमः या देवी सर्वभूतेषु शक्तिरूपेण संस्थिता नमस्तस्यै 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 नमो नमः या देवी सर्वभूतेषु श्रद्धारूपेण संस्थिता नमस्तस्यै 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 नमो नमः या देवी सर्वभूतेषु मातृरूपेण संस्थिता नमस्तस्यै 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 नमो नमः विद्या समस्तास्तव देवी भेदा यः समस्ता सकला जगत्सु पूरितमं वेद सा ते स्तुतिस्तव्यपरा अपरोक्तिः सर्वभूतायदा देवी मुक्तिप्रदायिनी त्वं स्तुता स्तुतैका भवन्तु कर्मत्रयः विद्यासु शास्त्रेषु विवेकदीपेषु आद्येषु वाक्येषु च काकुरन्ये अमद्गत्येन महान्तकारे विभ्रामयत्येव तदेव विश्वं यक्षांसि यत्रोग्रपिशास्तनागाः यत्तारयोधस्य बलान्यत्र यावानलो यत्र भ्राप्तिमन्ये पद्माभां पीतवस्त्रां करकलितलसत्प्रेमपद्मां वरान्धीं सर्वालङ्कारयुक्तां सततम् अभयदां उत्तमम्रां भवानीं श्रीविद्यां शान्तमूर्तिं सकलसुरनुगां सर्वसम्पत्प्रदात्रीम्। ॐ ध्यायेत्पुरन्दुजे देवीं करुणारुणविग्रहां कराभयकरां शान्तां स्मिरोत्फुल्लमुखाम्बुजां फलपद्मपदीकाशसपादाम्भोजसुशोभनां शुक्लाम्बरधरां धीरां लज्जापटविभूषितां प्रसन्नां धर्मकामाप्तमोक्षदां विश्वमङ्गलां स्वनाथवामभागस्थां उत्थानग्रहकारिणीं ओजिताग्नेदाभिगाशक्ति रामकृष्णे स्थिता किया सर्वविद्यास्वरूपां स्तां शारदां प्रणमाम्यहम्। Om Samraj Sakyam Vihaya Sadhare Chivrachinhaveshi Lindavedam Vashibhajan Yukayamayam Tam Anadosmi Buddham Namo Namo Buddhadivakaraya Namo Namo Gurudama Chantrikaya Namo Namo Ananta Gunadharaya Namo Namo Shakyamantaraya सरलवाणी ईशितत्वं प्रकाश्य कुशकटपरिशेषो ईशपुत्रो अनुदोयः समतिशयपवित्रं मेरिलं लोकबन्धुं परमप्रेममूर्तिं दीननाथं भजामः
from the lecture of Swami Vivekananda called My Master, describing Sri Ramakrishna. There have been various poets in Bengal whose songs have passed down to the people. They are sung in the streets of Calcutta and in every village. Most of these are religious songs, and their one central idea, which is perhaps peculiar to the religions of India, is the idea of realization. There is not a book in India on religion which does not breathe this idea. Man must realize God, feel God, see God, talk to God. That is religion. The Indian atmosphere is full of stories of saintly persons having visions of God. Such doctrines form the basis of their religion. And all these ancient books and scriptures are the writings of persons who came into direct contact with spiritual facts. These books were not written for the intellect. Any reasoning understand them, because they were written by men who saw the things of which they wrote, and they can be understood only by men who have raised themselves to the same height. They say there is such a thing as realization even in this life, and it is open to everyone. And religion begins with the opening of this faculty. This is the central idea in all religions, and this is why we may find one man with the most finished oratorical powers or the most convincing logic preaching the highest doctrines and yet unable to get people to listen to him, while we may find another, a poor person, who scarcely can speak the language of his own motherland, yet half the nation worships him in his own lifetime as God. When in India the idea somehow or other gets abroad that a man has raised himself to that state of realization, that religion is no more a matter of conjecture to him, that he is no more groping in the dark in such momentous questions as religion, the immortality of the soul, and God. People come from all quarters to see him, and gradually they become to worship him. In the temple, that is the temple that Sri Ramakrishna was conducting the worship, the temple at Dakshineshwar, in the temple was an image of the blissful mother. This boy, that is to say Sri Ramakrishna as a young person, this boy had to conduct the worship morning and evening, and by degrees this one idea filled his mind. Is there anything behind this image? Is it true that there is a mother of bliss in the universe? Is it true that she lives and guides the universe, or is it all a dream? Is there any reality in religion? This skepticism comes to the Hindu child. It is the skepticism of our country. Is this that we are doing real? And theories will not satisfy us. Although there are ready at hand almost all the theories that have ever been made with regard to God and soul, neither books nor theories can satisfy us. The one idea that gets hold of thousands of our people is this idea of realization. Is it true that there is a God? If it be true, can I see him? Can I realize the truth? The Western mind may think all this very impracticable, but to us it is intensely practical. For this idea, men will give up their lives. You have just heard how from the earliest times there have been persons who have given up all comforts and luxuries to live in caves and hundreds have given up their homes to weep bitter tears of misery on the banks of sacred rivers in order to realize this idea. Not to know in the ordinary sense of the word, not intellectual understanding, not a mere rationalistic comprehension of the real thing, not mere groping in the dark, but intense realization, much more real than this world is to our senses. That is the idea. I do not advance any proposition as to that just now, but that is the one fact that is impressed upon them. Thousands will be killed, other thousands will be ready. So upon this one idea, the whole nation for thousands of years has been denying and sacrificing themselves. For this idea, thousands of Hindus every year give up their homes, and many of them die through the hardships they have to undergo. To the Western mind, this must seem most visionary, and I can see the reason for this point of view. But though I have resided in the West, I still think this idea the most practical thing in life. Every moment I think of anything else is so much lost to me. Even the marvels of earthly sciences, everything is vain if it takes me away from that thought. Life is but momentary, whether you have the knowledge of an angel or the ignorance of an animal. Life is but momentary, whether you have the poverty of the poorest man in rags or the wealth of the richest living person. Life is but momentary, whether you are a downtrodden man living in one of the big streets of the big cities of the West or a crowned emperor ruling over millions. Life is but momentary, whether you have the best of health or the worst. Life is but momentary, whether you have the most poetical temperament or the most cruel. There is but one solution of life, says the Hindu, and that solution is what they call God and religion. If these be true, life becomes explained. Life becomes bearable, becomes enjoyable. Otherwise, life is but a senseless burden. That is our idea. But no amount of reasoning can demonstrate it. It can only make it probable, and there it rests. The highest demonstration of reasoning that we have in any branch of knowledge can only make a fact probable and nothing further. The most demonstrable facts of physical science are only probabilities, not facts yet. Facts are only in the senses. Facts have to be perceived, and we have to perceive religion to demonstrate it to ourselves. We have to sense God to be convinced that there is a God. We must sense the facts of religion to know that they are facts. Nothing else and no amount of reasoning, but our own perception can make these things real to us, can make my belief firm as a rock. That is my idea, and that is the Indian idea. This idea took possession of the boy, and his whole life became concentrated upon that. Day after day he would weep and say, "Mother, is it true that thou existest, or is it all poetry? Is the blissful mother an imagination of poets and misguided people, or is there such a reality?" We have seen that of books, of education in our sense of the word, he had none. And so much the more natural, so much the more healthy was his mind, so much the purer his thoughts, undiluted by drinking in the thoughts of others. Because he did not go to the university, therefore he thought for himself. Because we have spent half our lives in the university, we are filled with a collection of other people's thoughts. Well has Professor Max Muller said in his article, in the article that I've just referred to, that Swamiji had mentioned earlier, that this was a clean, original man. And the secret of that originality was that he was not brought up within the precincts of a university. However, this thought, whether God can be seen, which was uppermost in his mind, gained in strength every day until he could think of nothing else. He could no more conduct the worship properly, could no more attend to the various details in all their minuteness. Often he would forget to place the food offering before the image. Sometimes he would forget to wave the light. At other times he would wave it for hours and forget everything else. And that one idea was in his mind every day. Is it true that thou existest, O Mother? Why dost thou not speak? Art thou dead? Perhaps some of us here will remember that there are moments in our lives when, tired of all these ratiocinations of dull and dead logic, tired of plodding through books which after all teach us nothing, become nothing but a sort of intellectual opium eating. We must have it at stated times or we die. Tired with all this, the heart of our hearts sends out a wail. Is there no one in this universe who can show me the light? If thou art, show the light unto me. Why dost thou not speak? Why dost thou make thyself so scarce? Why send so many messengers and not thyself come to me? In this world of fights and factions, whom am I to follow and believe? If thou art the God of every man and woman alike, why comest thou not to speak to thy child and see if he is not ready? Well, to us all come such thoughts in moments of great depression, but such are the temptations surrounding us that the next moment we forget. For the moment it seemed that the doors of the heavens were going to be opened. For the moment it seemed as if we were going to plunge into the light effulgent. But the animal man again shakes off all these angelic visions. Down we go, animal man once more, eating and drinking and dying and drinking and eating again and again. But there are exceptional minds which are not turned away so easily, which once attracted can never be turned back. Whatever may be the temptations in the way, which want to see the truth, minds which want to see the truth, knowing that life must go. They say, let it go in a noble conquest. And what conquest is nobler than the conquest of the lower man, than this solution of the problem of life and death, of good and evil? At last it became impossible for him to serve in the temple. He left it and entered into a little wood that was near and lived there. About this part of his life, he told me many times that he could not tell when the sun rose or set or how he lived. He lost all thought of himself and forgot to eat. During this period, he was lovingly watched over by a relative who put into his mouth food which he mechanically swallowed. Days and nights thus passed with the boy. When a whole day would pass towards the evening, when the peal of bells in the temples and the voices singing would reach the wood, it would make the boy very sad, and he would cry, "Another day is gone in vain, Mother, and thou hast not come. Another day of this short life has gone, and I have not known the truth." In the agony of his soul, sometimes he would rub his face against the ground and weep, and this one prayer burst forth: "Do thou manifest thyself in me, thou Mother of the universe. See that I need thee and nothing else." Verily, he wanted to be true to his own ideal. He had heard that the mother never came until everything had been given up for her. He had heard that the mother wanted to come to everyone, but that they would not have her, that people wanted all sorts of foolish little idols to pray to, that they wanted their own enjoyments and not the mother. and that the moment they really wanted her with their whole soul and nothing else, that moment she would come. So he began to break himself into that idea. He wanted to be exact, even on the plane of matter. He threw away all the little property he had and took a vow that he would never touch money. And this one idea, I will not touch money, became a part of him. It may appear to be something occult, but even in afterlife, when he was sleeping, if I touched him with a piece of money, his hand would become bent and his whole body would become, as it were, paralyzed. The other idea that came into his mind was that lust was the other enemy. Man is a soul, and soul is sexless, neither man nor woman. The idea of sex and the idea of money were the two things, he thought, that prevented him from seeing the mother. This whole universe is the manifestation of the mother, and she lives in every woman's body. Every woman represents the mother. How can I think of woman in mere sex relation? That was the idea. Every woman was his mother. He must bring himself to the state when he would see nothing but mother in every woman, and this he carried out in his life.
I am going to read from the book, The Light of the Modern World. Sri Ramakrishna's love. Next to food, what every human being seeks most is love. Love is the hunger of the heart, which no amount of wealth or knowledge can satisfy. What is love? The popular view is that love is a kind of emotion or feeling. Saint Teresa has spoken of love as the union of wills. Vedantic teachers like Shankara and Ramanuja hold that love is a special state of knowledge. The Panchadasi, another Vedantic scripture, takes love to be an expression of ananda, joy, inherent in Atman. According to Swami Vivekananda, love is an expression of the sense of unity, identification, relationship of the soul with some person. Says Swamiji, love binds, love makes for the oneness. You become one, the mother with the child, families with the city, the world become one. For love is existence, God Himself. And all this is the manifestation of that one love, more or less expressed. The difference is only in degree, but it is the manifestation of that one love throughout. The Upanishad speaks of unity at two levels, the level of prana and the level of consciousness. Prana is the universal vital force sustaining all life. Ordinary human love is an expression of unifying force of prana. Love between parents and children, between husband and wife, between friends, all human relationships are expression of unity of prana. But ordinary human love has several limitations. It is usually found to be self-centered and is based on certain conditions. It causes attachment and often changes into hatred. Even if, in some cases, love is found to be pure and unconditional, since human life itself is impermanent, love is also impermanent. The human soul, however, hungers for boundless, pure, unconditional, eternal, everlasting love. Inquiry into the true nature of love led the sages of the Upanishads to the discovery of a higher level of love which is based on unity of consciousness. The sages discovered that behind or beyond the phenomenal world, which is ever-changing and impermanent, there is unchanging, eternal, ultimate reality, which is of the nature of infinite consciousness, known as Brahman. Brahman exists in all beings as the Atman or Pratyagatman, the inner self. This means all individual selves are part or aspects of infinite supreme self. Love, based on this unity of consciousness, is pure, unchanging, unconditional, and eternal. The spiritual love forms the real basis of even ordinary worldly love. Although, owing to ignorance, most people are not aware of this fact. This great idea of oneness of all selves in the Supreme Self is the real basis of human love, was propounded more than 3,000 years ago by a sage, Yajnavalkya. In the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, he tells his wife Maitreyi, the husband is loved not for the sake of the husband, but for the sake of the Supreme Self. The wife is loved not for the sake of wife, but for the sake of the Supreme Self. What this idea means is human love is an expression of God's love. True love is divine. Even Buddha warned against love, priti, and advised people to cultivate only friendliness, maitreyi. Such an attitude makes spiritual life self-centered and weakens family bond and social unity. By recovering the ancient Vedantic concept of spiritual foundation of love, Sri Ramakrishna has shown the way to harmonize human love and divine love. He made love for man an expression of love for God. Human beings are to be loved not as human beings, but as embodiments or manifestations of God. Human relationships should be divinized. Divinization of human relationships is an important contribution of Sri Ramakrishna to the world culture. This principle of divinization of human relationships can be applied in all areas of social interaction between parents and child, between employers and employee, between teachers and students, between doctors and patients, among fellow travelers, among neighbors, and so on. Divinization of relationships prevents misunderstandings, quarrels, and conflicts, and foster friendly cooperation and mutual help and eternal love.
I'm reading from a book by Sister Devamata, who is she's a Western nun who is well known for her classic days in an Indian monastery. So the title of the book is Sri Ramakrishna and His Disciples. In Sri Ramakrishna's teachings, there are no stereotyped doctrines or dogmas, no rigid church canons. He does not insist even on scriptural study. Upon one thing alone does he lay uncompromising stress: on living, embodying the faith in the life, being what one believes. To put it in his own homely phrase, mind and mouth must be one. That is, thought and life must coincide. One must be genuine all the way through. It's a very interesting principle. One of the discoveries of modern psychology is, and that is very closely related to spiritual psychology. Very often, there is an invisible vertical wall, a barrier between what we believe in and what we want to believe in. So frequently when we say, I believe in God, in a way it only amounts to saying that I want to believe in God. There is a vertical barrier. If the belief becomes real, then all the problems will be solved. Now, in the case of these great spiritual teachers, and mind and mouth must be one, that vertical barrier has collapsed. There is no wall. So when we pray, the prayer becomes real prayer. The prayer becomes opening of the heart. That's Gandhi's definition of prayer. Gandhi used to conduct public prayers. And that is incidentally the definition of confession given by Augustine in his famous classic Confessions. So that is the uniqueness of Sri Ramakrishna's teachings. Unswavering fidelity to the ideal he places at the foundation of all moral and spiritual growth. But according to him, merit or growth rests less on the form of the ideal than the degree of the fidelity. This language seems to be maybe not very direct. What it means is, very often, when we try to practice spirituality, when we say, well, I believe, I pray, and then when we come out to the place of worship, then we become practical. So in actual practice, this kind of spirituality doesn't work. We are living in a highly complex, competitive society. So this kind of prayer, this kind of spiritual values do not really operate. In the practical world, the practical should be underlined. We may be capital letter, thick letter. So very often this barrier of pragmatism stands in between what we want to do and what we end up doing. So that's why Sri Ramakrishna solves the problem by saying that mind and mouth must be one. It's a very interesting thing. So when somebody like Sri Ramakrishna prays to Mother, that vertical wall, the barrier between the verbal meaning of the prayer that he utters and what he actually feels within, there is no wall of pragmatism. So very often, this is very interesting thing. So we often live in a pragmatic world, and then we try to interpret our prayer in terms of formal psalms and hymns. So that's why Sri Ramakrishna says, mind and mouth must be one. If a person is sincere and yearns for God or his words, he will in the end realize him whether he knows philosophy or not. So philosophy is often an attempt to try to bridge the gap, to break down the wall, but doesn't often succeed. If in his search after the Lord, he takes a wrong path to the Lord will directly take him to himself, provided the devotee thirsts after the Lord. There was a time when, in mad yearning, I would throw myself on the ground under the Panchavadi and cry aloud to my Divine Mother for more light. This is Sri Ramakrishna's own words. Sister Devarmada, she was a very famous and spiritually enlightened Western nun who traveled in India, visited many monasteries, and wrote the famous classic Days in Indian Monastery. So Sri Ramakrishna's words are quoted here. How he used to pray, grant unto me that I may realize God in all aspects. Many think that knowledge of God cannot be attained without the study of books. But higher than reading is hearing, higher than hearing is seeing, better than reading about Benares is hearing directly of it from one who has been there. Benares is a holy city. Like Jerusalem for Christians and Jews, Benares is for Hindu society. Better than hearing of Benares is seeing it with one's own eyes. Too often people depend on outer authority rather than on direct sight. A gentleman once said to his friend, yesterday, as I was passing along the street, Mukherjee's house collapsed with a terrible crash. Then the other man says, let me see if there is anything about it in the newspaper. Then the friend who actually saw the house collapsing replied, he found nothing in the newspaper. Then the other man said, but I saw it with my own eyes. The gentleman said, as I was walking along the street, I saw it with my own eyes, the house collapsing. Then his friend retorted, you must be mistaken. There is nothing about it in the newspaper. God was a palpable fact to Sri Ramakrishna. He had gazed upon deity in his personal aspect. He had also visioned the absolute. Those 3 days and nights of supreme contemplation in that locked chamber, after taking his final vows, had lifted him to the plane of pure being where he had beheld unclothed divinity. Now, with unwavering conviction, he taught his disciples not to accept invisibility as a proof of non-existence, but to recognize it, that it was his own blindness that veiled the face of God from his vision. You see many stars at night in the sky, Sri Ramakrishna once exclaimed, but find them not when the sun rises. Can you say that there are no stars in the heavens of day? So, O man, because you behold not God in the days of your ignorance, say not that there is no God. Seeing God leads the thought automatically to a recognition of his oneness, Sri Ramakrishna maintained. Infinity cannot be multiplied. There cannot be more than one infinite being. Deity with form and formless, personal and impersonal, manifested and unmanifested, all must be contained in that being. Sri Ramakrishna illustrated this by a parable. Two persons were hotly disputing as to the color of chameleon. One said, "The chameleon on that palm tree is of a beautiful red color." The other said, "You are mistaken. The chameleon is not red, but blue." Not being able to settle the matter by argument, both went to the person who lived under that tree and had watched the chameleon in all its phases of color. One of them said, "Sir, is not the chameleon on that tree a red color?" The person replied, "Yes, sir." The other disputant said, "What do you say? It's not red, it's blue." The person again replied quietly, "Yes, it is blue." He knew that the chameleon constantly changes color. Thus, it was that he said yes to both of these conflicting statements. Sri Ramakrishna says, "The Supreme likewise has many forms. The devotee who has seen God in one respect only, in one aspect only, knows him in that aspect alone. But only he who has seen him in manifold aspects is in a position to say all these forms are of one God and God is multiform. He is formless and with form, and many are his forms which no one knows. Fire itself has no definite shape, but in glowing embers it assumes certain forms. The formless fire is then endowed with form. Similarly, the formless God sometimes invests himself with definite form. As water, when concealed, becomes ice, so the visible form of the Almighty is condensed manifestation of the all-pervading formless Brahman. It is one impersonal, attributeless, transcendental reality. It may be called, in fact, the Absolute Solidified. As ice is part and parcel of the water, remains in the water, and afterwards melts into it, so the personal God is part and parcel of the impersonal. He rises from the impersonal, remains there, and ultimately merges into it. According to Sri Ramakrishna, ignorance is the consciousness of many things, seeing variety. True knowledge is the consciousness of unity, knowledge of oneness. Beholding God face to face is realization. Unity and variety both vanish when realization comes. Suppose you get a thorn in your foot. You would say, you take another thorn to get it out. When the thorn is out, you throw both away. I and mine make up ignorance. Thou and thine make up knowledge. The true devotee says, Lord, thou art the only doer. I am the instrument in thy hands. I act as I am made to act by thee. Thine are all these riches, this house, this family, everything. Nothing is mine. I am only a servant. Mine is only to serve according to thy bidding. Out of the sense of oneness grows inevitably the spirit of universal tolerance and brotherliness, which forms the background of all Sri Ramakrishna's thought. Intolerance springs from a sense of difference, and this sense of difference comes from superficiality. All differences lie on the surface. As we approach the depths and heights of being, we advance nearer and nearer to a central unit. Differences vanish. Sri Ramakrishna describes it thus. When a man is on the plain, he sees the lowly grass and the lofty tree. But when he ascends to the mountain top, tall trees and lowly grass all become one indistinguishable mass of verdure. This does not mean that Sri Ramakrishna wished to revel everything down to a homogeneous flatness. Diversity is the essential law of creation, Sri Ramakrishna says, but he adds that beneath this diversity is an equally essential unity. And only as we learn to place our accent on that shall we heal the wounds of the world inflicted by warring intolerance and discord. If God is one, all mankind becomes one and clash of interests is completely effaced. What is Sri Ramakrishna's attitude towards this outer diversified world? It can be defined most aptly in words which Ernest Renan wrote when speaking of Saint Francis of Assisi and himself. Life, like the patriarchs of Assisi, says Renan, I have traveled through the world without being attached to it, a humble lodger, if I may put it that way. Both of us, while possessing nothing of our own, have yet felt ourselves rich. God gave us the temporary use of the world, and we have been content to enjoy without possessing. So the idea that we are all taken lodging in this world with this body. So once we develop that conviction, we will be able to live in the world without being of the world. So this is one of the central teachings of Sri Ramakrishna, the Gospel. Live in the world, but without being part of the world, without being worldly. Living in the world without being worldly minded. That teaching is beautifully described by Sister Devamata with a quotation from Ernest Renan, who wrote about Saint Francis of Assisi. Like the patriarch of Assisi, I have traveled through the world without being attached to it, a humble lodger, if I may put it that way. Both of us, while possessing nothing of our own, have yet felt ourselves rich. God gave us the temporary use of this world, which is the Lord's where we are living in, and we have been content to enjoy without possessing anything. Now we have a few announcements. After this, we will have flower offerings by devotees. So devotees can come forward and do flower offering. And during the flower offering, Kathy Butler and Felder Graham will give musical offering, piano offering. And after that, we will have Prasad lunch in Vivekananda Hall. After flower offering, all of you can please proceed to the Vivekananda Hall. Thank you. Namaskar. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat Sri Ramakrishna Pranamastu.